Spyder, Spyder, here comes Spyder, CFL's Red Zone. Spyder, Spyder, here comes Spyder, CFL's Red Zone Rule. In the Red Zone.
Hey, back! Spyder's back! I should have my drum pad here, okay? And my sticks and doing that. Anyway, Spyder's back. It's been a while. It's been a while, and I'm going to do a couple sessions and get back on track here. We have a windy day here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It's November 14th. Hey, it's good to see you again. I just want to start off right off the bat by getting right into the weekend just passed in the CFL. And this is going to be an ad lib. I'm just going to go off the cuff again, improvise and so forth. I made a few notes. I may just look at a few notes, but you know, like I said, you know, every time I come on YouTube, that there's no remakes here. This is totally live. I just do it. If there's mistakes, there's mistakes. If the next session, then I'll talk about the mistakes and correct them and go over the mistakes with you. That's what I do. So there's no green screen or anything. There's no gimmicky stuff here. This is totally authentic. You know, I'm very, very Canadian, by the way. I still have my old BlackBerry. They won't be servicing it soon. I guess January 4th, but I have actually two of them. And playbooks. I had the playbooks hooking up to the monitors. And I dug out some of the older graphics where it says Spyder's proposed new CFL Red-Zone Rule on that front graphic, and then the field diagram. By the way, with Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule field diagram with the 20-yard lines outlined in red. The number 20 and the 20-yard line itself. Imagine that on a CFL field. And you know what? I think it's time we get back to the old logo. It's so colorful. You can see in the diagram in front with my Spyder CFL Red-Zone Rule diagram. It's really stands out. You know, I don't know. I know they wanted to change a bit, and I tried to be innovative. And this is, you know, before Randy Ambrosi became commissioner. But like, everybody likes that logo, even if it's a facsimile of it. But get it back, because I'm sorry, the new logo is just too dull. You can't, like, it just doesn't stand out. Look at the NFL logo. Like, I don't watch NFL football. I'm totally CFL, okay, all the way. I've been all my life. My son, though, was down to Las Vegas recently with his sport buddy friends, and they went to an NFL Raiders game, and okay, against the Eagles. I actually watched it. I don't watch NFL football, and my son really doesn't either. He really doesn't. He's just like me. I brought him up like that. When he was 14, I took him to his first Grey Cup game in Calgary, actually, in 2000, when the BC Lions beat the Montreal Alouettes, when the Guess Who played at halftime and opened with Bus Rider and ended with Share the Land. They did No Time Too. And it was a horrible system they had to play through. It was terrible. They didn't have a very good system in Calgary. They still don't, although Keith Urban brought all his gear and so forth. But the Guess Who just plugged into their system. And anyway, let's get back on track here. So yeah, my son, you know, I asked him about how, you know, 68,000 people there. The attitude, they're so positive there. Everything is hyped up. It's not like in Canada where the CFL gets no media coverage. I'm going to go over that as well and how brutal that is. I was thinking the other day when I was in the car, like, you know, like, it was actually yesterday, and I was thinking, why am I listening locally in Canada on a radio station about NFL football? They should be doing right across Canada a CFL game on radio, the game of the week, and that's what TSN has to do. Start putting together a program, the CFL game of the week. You know, the one they have in now, with all the sounds and so forth, and mics on players and that. CFL 30, I believe it's called, in 30 minutes. You know, it doesn't really promote the game. It doesn't really promote the game. And TSN, you're a partner, and you own the Argonauts, and you gotta start, promoting the CFL more. And the CFL has to do a much better job marketing and branding wise. I'm going to get into that as well. And and also CTV's got to show a CFL game of the week at least on a Saturday. They got to do it rather than U.S. College. I was down in Halifax for a walk and at the World Trade Center Plaza walk, and I looked, I couldn't believe it. It's all U.S. college football. Not one, two CFL games on Saturday. Not one CFL game on all the screens. That's how bad it is. And in the bars, it's the same way. Are we living in the United States or are we living in Canada? Really and truly. I mean, I know I'm going to get into what I think the CFL has to do and changes. I'm going to get into that right away, actually. But I just want to mention about the Ryder Calgary Stampeder game. And the referee, it's one thing, the Elks aren't very good. They're actually pretty bad. Okay, and there's a lot of the Ottawa Rough Riders, excuse me, Red Blacks. Ottawa Red Blacks are not much better, where they got 2 wins each. But the Elks, Edmonton had an interception with 2 minutes left in the game, and I think it was midfield, and they have a good running back in Tucker, and they would have gotten field goal position and ran the clock down and won that game. And it's not fair. I'm sorry, the CFL. That was Beck's. The fix was in. That was not a pass interference. And I'm sorry, Rider fans. That's not right. That was not pass interference. Actually, I think the Riders would have lost. But you know why they did that? Because they knew that the Calgary Stampeders would probably beat Winnipeg next week because they're not going to play their best players. Okay, and the referees in the CFL knew that the Riders have a good chance of losing to Hamilton. That's a meaningful game next week. Okay, for home field advantage, either Montreal or Hamilton in the semifinal, Eastern semifinal. So they knew that, and that's why they did that. And unfortunately, the Edmonton coach used his timeout up, and you have to have a timeout to if you have a challenge left, you have to have a timeout in the last 3 minutes. I believe that's the rule. That's a ridiculous rule. And where's the eye in the sky? I'm telling you, the fix was in, and and you know what? I'm very disappointed in the CFL because they want that home field because of the stadium and everything. They want the Riders to keep moving. They don't want Calgary Stampeders in the Grey Cup. They don't want them even going in the Western Final. They want the Saskatchewan Roughriders semi-final game in Saskatchewan, and they want Saskatchewan to go to Winnipeg. It's so political and really disappointing. And I'm sorry, I have an opinion, okay? And there's opinion versus fact, but I'm telling you right now, that was not an interference call, okay? It was not a pass interference call. So that's fact. That's fact, and it wasn't. And why was it called? That's the why. I just gave you the reason it was called, okay? And that's fact too. And it's very sad that a professional football league, any professional football league, look what went on in the World Series with Houston Astros. This stuff has to stop. Edmonton, struggling enough. They deserve, to win that game. And you know what? I don't think Saskatchewan would have beat Hamilton either. So I think Calgary would be Winnipeg, and Calgary would have had to host the West semi-final. But unfortunately, like I said, for the third time now, and I really mean it, that call stunk and the fix was in. That was done deliberately. Anyway, that's my rant. I've been ranting a long time on that. I know the Saskatchewan Roughrider fans are probably going to like me on this. But anyway, I think if you're being honest and you're being truthful with yourself and you know football, that was not a pass interference, which probably meant that Edmonton would have won that game. Anyway, because there were only 2 points, just needed a field goal. And I think they would have ran Tucker. They would have got in field goal position, kicked the field goal, the clock would have went down, and it would have been hard for well, it depends on the kick, but it's still how much time is left on the clock. But I think the Riders probably would have been in a real trouble there, and that's why the refs did what they did. You know, you're bad enough refs. You're throwing too many flags on the field, like borderline holding. I mean, interference calls is brutal. A lot of them not interference calls. I mean, that one was blatantly not interference. You're ruining the game. You're ruining the game. You're ruining the game. Punt returns for big touch. You're ruining the game. You're destroying the game. And so is the Canadian ratio, by the way. They're talking, Dickinson talks about Dave Dickinson. He's because, he was called up for the Canadian Mafia thing against, the Western final against Winnipeg, I guess, and Calgary. But he says, well, he contradicted himself, actually. There was an article in Three Down Nation, he was saying something about, something about, they're blaming, the Canadian old linemen, how weak they are, and the American defensive players are so much stronger. That's why the scoring is way down this year. And like compared to the NFL scoring's up, and CFL scoring is down, considerably down. And he was saying, well, like he wasn't really blaming it on the Canadian ratio, but then again he goes on, on the post-game show in Calgary when they beat BC, and or on Monday, I forget when it was, but or they interviewed him on 7790 radio in Calgary, and he said, yeah, there's always been a major problem. This is Dave Dickinson said just the opposite, but with Canadian depth. Hey, hello, there's been a major problem. You got 28 universities here, and maybe 6 good teams. Like, come on, you get 800 in the United States. Yes, that's the biggest problem right now. Well, I'm going to go over the problems of the CFL right now, where they need to change. I mean, I'm going to go over with the Canadian ratio is a huge problem. And you have to play 7 and now 10 nationals. And you have to have backups. And half the team have to be Canadian. It's virtually impossible. It's not obtainable. It's not reachable. It's impossible. You get the best Canadian players going to the NFL, and there's no restrictions put on them. And then you get the Canadian Players Association, made up of mostly Canadian players and Canadian old linemen that are running the CFL, and they're handcuffing the CFL teams and coaches and shoving the Canadian ratio down their throats, where they can't even play the best players. They're sitting, that happen to be American, that are sitting on the bench. I heard numerous calls lately calling in, complaining about Canadian content by CFL fans that are going to walk away. And many have already. I know a lot of BC fans complained a lot about it. And Winnipeg fans did. But now they got one team that got some good Canadian content overall. Or maybe 2 in the CFL. That's it. Out of 9. And then if they get injuries, they're screwed too. But getting back to what I was saying about the Canadian ratio, I mean, it's unbelievable, the juggling. And you can't play your best players. I heard a Calgary Stampeder fan call in and say, I pay good money. And I heard numerous fans call in and say this. I pay good money, he says. And I know my son does too. And my son feels the same way. Not to go watch like Canadian ratio players that are guaranteed their spots that aren't even good enough to be on the field, when you got better Americans. Like, he wants to see that Rock guy. He said, why isn't he out there? What a returner. He only played 1 game because the Canadian ratio, they can't get him in. And Amos, and he said, that Huff, they let Huff go probably because of the Canadian ratio. Like he said, I want to see the best players play. I don't care, he says, what they are, where they're from. I want to see the best players play. And one other person made a comment, says, yeah, it's the only league, supposedly professional league, where it's where you're from who plays. It's ridiculous. You imagine the NFL, they having a ratio? Like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like, or the NHL or MLS soccer have a 3 Canadian roster ratio. Like on their Canadian MLS soccer franchise teams. And maybe the CFL could do that, but you can't have any more than five on a practice run and develop them. They need to go out and find the best O-lineman that's out there, the best American O-lineman, and bring them in. They can't be handcuffed like this every team. I mean, it's brutal. Like, Saskatchewan Roughrider fans were complaining about their O-line, Canadian O-linemen in calls. Ottawa complaining all the time. Hamilton were calling in, fans complaining about their Canadian content and the horrible Canadian O-linemen that are getting, by the way, a lot of money because they're forced to start them. To fill the ratio, they're getting $150 to $175, $180 to $200 to $225,000. I'm losing my breath over it. You know, it's unbelievable. It really upsets me, and it's destroying the CFL. It's absolutely destroying the CFL, and that's the absolute truth. And those are the facts. These are the facts. And the CFL are losing all kinds of fans because of it. They are. And here's another big reason why they're losing fans. And by the way, I want to identify for you the majority, the mass market I call, of the sports fan in Canada. And it's not the older that have been hanging on, you know, like me, CFL fans. And they're diminishing because we're getting older. They're dropping off like flies, and there's the young major sports market made up of younger generation fans. They're not watching the CFL. They're watching the NFL, the NHL. They're watching Major League Soccer. They're watching the Rafters, the NBA. They're watching Major League Baseball. Those are the fans, identifying them, that the CFL needs, that they haven't even tapped into. So the Canadian ratio has to go. It has to be eliminated. It has to be demolished. It's old school. It doesn't work in today's professional sports world. It just doesn't work. If it did, all the other professional sports league would have it. It doesn't work. And it's killing the CFL product on the field. So that has to change. And they got to start practicing more than 4.5 hours a day. That's counting travel time. Imagine in meeting sessions. It's ridiculous when the NFL actually practice double that almost a day. Okay? There's another area that has to change. And by the way, what has to really change too is the CFL can't allow, and the owners, are you listening to me, owners? You can't allow the Canadian Players Association, made up of Canadian O-linemen and Canadian to run the CFL and tell you what to do and tell you who dictates to you who plays and starts in the CFL. Because they got the Canadian ratio, they get your handcuff, and they're basically running the CFL. It has to change. You got to lock them out. You got to get rid of the Canadian Players Association. It's got to go. It's destroying the CFL, and I mean it. If it doesn't change the CFL, I don't think it's going to stay in business. They will never survive. They have to get rid of the Canadian ratio completely. Gone. It's got to go. And if the Canadian players are good enough, you know, hey, I want to see the best Canadian players play in the CFL, but they have to be good enough to be able to make the roster and make a starting position. I was talking to a St. Mary's football player about this, and I told him about my CFL Red-Zone Rule, and he was blown away. I'll tell you about that too later. And he says he agrees with me, the Canadian ratio, and a lot of most all the CIS football players, they all want to play in the NFL. They don't even watch the CFL. They look down on it actually because of that. And then the ones that are playing in the CFL, you know, they just flip a switch, right? You know, like they're hypocritical because they want the Canadian Players Association to run this with their Canadian race. Yeah, they want to control it with the CIS. It's unbelievable. But they all don't even watch the CIS players. Don't even watch the CFL. They watch the NFL because they want to play in the NFL. And he even said this, the St. Mary's player, this receiver, and he also agreed with me that he doesn't want a Canadian ratio to be able to make a CFL roster or a CFL team. Starting position. He wants to, if he ever got drafted by the NFL, the NFL don't do that. You have to make the roster and make a starting position. Okay, like Singleton did, the Canadian. That's with the Philadelphia Eagles. That's the way you get respected as a league, and that's the way the Canadian players get respected if they're on a CFL team, on the roster, and they're starting. Without the Canadian ratio that hands it to them because of their passport, that gives them half the roster. Half the roster is handed to Canadian players that aren't good enough. A lot of them, and Canadian linemen that aren't good enough, and they start. And that's a lot of the reason that the league is declining in popularity, because the majority of sports fans in Canada, they want to only watch the best available talent and players on a team start and play for a whole entire game. That's exactly it in a nutshell. That's what they want. Okay? And here's another biggie. Here's another biggie. And why this is so true. Do you know what the average percentage of touchdowns scored in the red zone this year in the CFL is? For 2021, with 2 games left to play? I checked it. You can go on the site and see it. CFL and the stats on their statistic section. 49.6. Now they had a surge because of the K in 2019. Went from, because in the last 10 years, or before that, actually before 2017, 2018, prior, in the last 10 years or so, it was like between 50 and 55%, or slightly less. Because in 2017 it was 54.8, and in 2018 it's 54.7. You know how many? You know what the Riders' percentage of average touchdown scored in the red zone was that year? 37.5%. They had over 100 2 and outs. They had the lowest. This year, and then I want to tell you what happened in 2019, because 3 teams only had 12 wins, imagine, in the CFL. That's how bad it was. It actually bumped up by 3 points, but that only amounted, and it went to like 50, I think 57.8, yeah. And that only amounted to 1.3 more touchdowns per team, okay? So 49.6%, it's dropped 7 points. It may slightly go up because the best teams are playing weaker teams, and the Riders had 3 touchdowns in the red zone there because they're playing the Elks, right? They have only won 2 games, so yeah, it's slightly going to go up, but it's probably going to be about 50%. So it's going to be down a lot, 7%, or maybe 6.8 or something. But okay, but that was a one-off, that 57.8, because how bad the teams are, how weak. I mean, imagine 3 teams, only 12 wins. But anyway, okay, this is why I've been saying, and there's the proof and evidence why the CFL needs to adopt my Spyder CFL Red-Zone Rule. That, by the way, is still alive. Okay, and hopefully this year it'll be presented to the CFL Innovation Rules Committee. Okay, and because it'll be a full season hopefully next year. Okay, so we'll see what the verdict will be. Okay, but they have to look at that number and that refocuses. I mean, like where they're revisiting my CFL Red-Zone Rule, and it gives it a lot more merit because. And another thing, my CFL Red-Zone Rule, just like you see there, on the monitor, I don't know if you can read it because it's washed out. I used the older Spyder's proposed new CFL Red-Zone Rule graphic. I had one with the new Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule hats, these here with the graphic, but I used that because it was a little wider. I don't know if it showed well, but this is basically what it's saying. Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule, with my new Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule hats. My son did this for me. Complemented by the new compatible CFL Red Zone kick. So football fans, if you want no more distasteful 2-down football stops in the red zone and no more boring, predictable, non-eventful, easy chip shot field goals in the red zone, in the CFL, chant loud in the red zone. We want Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule. We want Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule. Learn more about Spyder's CFL Red-Zone Rule on YouTube. There's the diagram again with the 20-yard line outlined in red with the number 20 outlined in red as well. And by the way, you can find my last presentation is going to be presented to the CFL Innovation Rules Committee, okay, in it'd be 2022 on my Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule Facebook page, okay? And also my new CFL Red Zone Rule, Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule brochures with my Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule in a nutshell, okay? Info there, and I had 500 made of them, okay? I was going to give them over at the Touchdown Atlantic. I don't know if that's dead in the water, but you never know. I had it all. I had the banner. We were going to give out brochures and everything, but that guy from St. Mary's, football player, wide receiver, he actually played in BC. He wants me to come in to the coaches and the players and give them all, like on my CFL Red Zone Rule. And by the way, I went over it with him. He was blown away by it so instantly, just like that. He said it would take the CFL three-down game to a whole new level, and he agreed with me. But having my presentation, that would give a third down a real purpose and meaning, and put a real signature on our CFL three-down game. So anyway, I'm going to do another session, talk more. A part 2 of this session. My presentation, my new presentation is going to be presented to the CFL Innovation Rules Committee and the CFL's Rules Committee 2022. Randy Ambrosi has the new presentation, which I put up, by the way, on my CFL Red Zone Rule Facebook page, okay? You can see it there, all right? So take care of yourself. Signing out, Spyder, here comes Spyder.